Silence is not empty. Silence is where God speaks. You've tried everything: books, teachers, crowds. You've searched in noise, in effort, in becoming someone more, and still something feels missing, not outside of you, inside, that quiet ache that asks, is this all there is? Listen closely. God is not hiding from you. You're just too loud to hear Him. The soul does not speak in words. It never has. Words belong to the mind, and the mind belongs to noise. That is why so many people read scriptures yet never touch truth. They hear sermons yet feel empty. They repeat prayers yet remain restless. Because truth does not shout. It does not explain itself. It does not argue. The soul speaks in a language older than words. A language you once knew before you were taught how to think. Think about the quietest moments of your life. Not the happiest, the quietest. Moments when time seemed to pause. When something inside you softened without effort. When you felt whole without knowing why. That was not emotion. That was recognition. The soul speaks through stillness, through presence, through a subtle knowing that does not need proof. It arrives like dawn, not with noise but with certainty. You don't hear the sunrise, yet suddenly everything is illuminated. Most people miss God because they expect Him to arrive like thunder, a voice, a sign, a miracle loud enough to convince the mind. But God does not compete with the mind. He waits for it to be quiet. Imagine standing beside a lake early in the morning. No wind, no movement. The surface is calm, undisturbed. In that stillness, the sky appears perfectly reflected. The clouds, the light, the vastness, all visible without effort. Now throw stones into that lake. Ripples form, the reflection shatters. Nothing is wrong with the sky, the disturbance is below. Your inner world is the same. Thoughts are stones, worries are stones, regrets, plans, fears, ambitions, stones, and as long as you keep throwing them, you will say, God is not here. God has always been here. You just haven't stopped moving long enough to see Him. Silence is not something you do. It is something you allow. You don't force the lake to be still. You stop disturbing it. This is where most people fail. They try to achieve silence. They sit down and fight their thoughts. They struggle to be peaceful. And in that struggle, they create more noise. Silence is not a battle. It is a surrender. When you stop chasing thoughts, they lose power. When you stop feeding them attention, they slow down on their own. Like a child who stops crying when no one reacts. And in that slowing, something deeper emerges, a presence, a warmth, a quiet joy that does not depend on circumstances. This is the soul speaking. It doesn't tell you what to do next week. It doesn't give you strategies or plans. It simply says, you are home. And when you touch that place, even for a moment, something changes forever. You become less reactive, less desperate, less hungry for approval, because once you have tasted inner silence, noise loses its charm. This is why the world feels exhausting. It talks non-stop. It pulls you outward constantly. It rewards volume, speed, and performance. But the soul grows in slowness, in pauses, in spaces between thoughts. That is why people feel closer to God in nature, not because trees preach sermons, but because they are silent. They don't demand attention. They simply are. Silence teaches you how to be without effort. And in that being, faith is no longer belief. It becomes experience. You don't believe in God after silence. You recognize Him. This is the first step on the silent path, learning that truth is not something you hear. It is something that reveals itself when you stop listening to everything else. And once you understand this, you will never rush silence again. You will protect it, return to it, live from it. Because that quiet space is not empty, it is full of God. Most people think noise is just sound, traffic, music, voices, screens. But the loudest noise in your life has nothing to do with your ears. It lives inside you. Noise is fear pretending to be activity. Look closely at how people live. Constant motion, endless scrolling, always talking, always planning, always proving, not because life demands it, but because stillness exposes something they don't want to face. Silence removes distractions. And when distractions disappear, you are left alone with yourself, your regrets, your unanswered questions, your unresolved pain. That's uncomfortable, so people call silence boring or useless or unproductive. But what they really mean is this: silence is honest. When you sit quietly, there is nowhere to hide, no role to perform, no image to maintain, no applause to chase, just you as you are. And that scares the ego. The ego survives on noise, on comparison, on movement, on becoming. It whispers, do more, be more, hurry, because if you stop, if you become still, you might notice that something is missing, or worse, something is false. So you keep yourself busy. You call it ambition, you call it responsibility, you call it success. But deep down, it's fear of meeting yourself without distractions. Silence asks dangerous questions, questions no one else can answer for you. Am I living truthfully? Am I loving deeply? Am I aligned with what matters? Or am I just surviving? Noise keeps these questions quiet. Silence brings them forward. That is why the first few moments of silence often feel uncomfortable. The mind resists. Thoughts rush in faster than usual. Memories surface. Emotions knock unexpectedly. And people say, this isn't for me. But that reaction is not failure. It is the beginning. It's like cleaning a room that hasn't been opened in years. Dust rises first. It looks worse before it looks better. Silence stirs what has been suppressed, and what has been suppressed is not evil. It is unhealed. Fear doesn't want healing. Fear wants avoidance. So it convinces you that silence is dangerous, that you'll fall apart, that you'll lose control. But the opposite is true. Silence doesn't break you. It reveals what is already broken, so it can finally mend. Have you ever noticed how pain demands attention when you stop moving? An old ache, a tired body, an exhausted heart. Movement hides pain. Stillness reveals it. But revelation is the doorway to freedom. Courage is not loud confidence. Courage is sitting still while discomfort speaks. Not running, not numbing, not distracting yourself, just listening. When you stay with silence long enough, something remarkable happens. The fear loses its edge, the thoughts slow down, the emotions soften. You realize they were never enemies, they just wanted to be acknowledged. And in that moment, silence changes its character. It stops feeling empty. It starts feeling spacious, like a room with windows finally open. This is where transformation begins, not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in quiet acceptance. You stop fighting yourself and the inner war ends. Faith grows here, not faith as belief, but as trust. Trust that you can sit with life as it is. Trust that you don't need to escape yourself to be okay. Noise was never strength. It was armor. Silence removes the armor. and shows you that you were never weak. This is why silence feels threatening at first. It dismantles as false identities, false urgency, false importance, and once those fall away, what remains is simple, grounded, real. You don't become passive, you become clear. You don't lose ambition, you lose desperation. You don't stop acting, you start acting from truth instead of fear. This is the hidden gift of silence. It exposes fear, not to punish you, but to free you. And when fear loosens its grip, God no longer feels distant, because fear was the noise blocking the connection. Silence doesn't make you fearless. It makes fear irrelevant. And that is power. We go deeper still. Most people say they are searching for God. They read books, they listen to talks, they travel to holy places, they collect beliefs the way others collect trophies. But God is not a destination, and truth is not something you acquire. God is not found. God is remembered. There is a deep difference between learning something new and remembering something ancient. Learning adds, remembering removes. That is why silence feels familiar. It doesn't introduce you to something foreign. It returns you to something forgotten. Watch a child before the world teaches them who they should be. They stare without agenda. They laugh without strategy. They cry without shame. They live in the present because they do not know how to escape it yet. That presence is not ignorance. It is innocence. As adults, we lose that not because life is cruel, but because life is loud. We are taught to rush, to perform, to define ourselves. Whizzed by achievements and labels, and slowly, without noticing, we move away from being into becoming smarter, becoming richer, becoming more impressive. But in all that becoming, we forget how to simply exist. Silence reverses that direction. It moves you from becoming back into being. You don't remember God by effort. You remember God by relaxation. Think of a song you once loved deeply. You don't force yourself to remember it. You hear a few notes and suddenly the whole melody returns. God is like that, a forgotten melody inside you. Silence plays the first note. When you sit quietly without trying to fix yourself, something softens. The need to improve dissolves. The pressure to become someone fades. And in that easing, memory awakens. You remember what it feels like to be whole without achievement, to be enough without explanation, to exist without justification. This is why silence feels sacred. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is truthful. The mind always wants progress linking past to future. The soul lives only in now, and God exists only in the now. That is why searching feels endless. You are always moving away from the place where God actually is. Silence brings you back. It doesn't answer questions. It dissolves the questioner. And that is the most frightening thing for the ego, because the ego survives by seeking. It needs distance, it needs goals, it needs tomorrow. But God does not live in tomorrow. He lives in this breath, this pause, this still awareness behind your thoughts. That awareness is not created by silence. It is revealed by it, like dust settling in a room when movement stops. You don't need to believe this. You only need to sit and see. The moment you stop chasing meaning, meaning arises. The moment you stop searching for God, God becomes obvious. This is not philosophy, this is experience. Silence removes the layers you thought were you, the roles, the fears, the ambitions, the wounds. And what remains is not emptiness, it is presence. And presence has a quiet intelligence, a deep warmth, a sense of rightness that cannot be explained. You feel grounded, not high, not emotional, just real. This is remembering. You are not becoming divine. You are uncovering what was never lost. This is why silence heals so deeply. It doesn't give you something new to carry. It takes burdens off your shoulders. And when you remember God, faith stops being borrowed. It becomes your own. No book can give you this. No teacher can hand it to you. They can only point. Silence lets you see. This is the turning point on the path. The moment you realize the journey was never outward, it was inward, and it was always waiting. This is where listening begins. Most people think prayer is powerful because of the words they use. They search for the right sentence, the right tone, the right promise to make. They believe if they speak clearly enough, loudly enough, sincerely enough, God will finally respond. But prayer was never me. And to be a speech, it was meant to be a relationship. Talking is easy, listening is rare. From childhood, we are trained to speak, to explain, to justify, to ask. But almost no one teaches us how to listen inwardly, how to stay quiet without drifting, how to be receptive without expectation. So prayer becomes one-sided, a list of needs, a negotiation, a complaint wrapped in hope. And then people say God doesn't answer. But how can you hear an answer when you never stop talking? Silence transforms prayer from demand into devotion. When you speak to God, you are still in control. You decide the topic, you decide the tone, you decide when it ends. But when you fall silent, control dissolves and humility enters. Listening requires trust. Trust that something wiser than your mind exists. Trust that you don't need to manage the conversation. Trust that answers may come in ways you did not expect. Sometimes the answer is not a voice, it is clarity. Sometimes it is not guidance, it is peace. Sometimes it is not direction, it is acceptance. Silence teaches you that God's responses are not verbal, they are experiential. Have you ever sat quietly after asking a deep question and suddenly felt calm without knowing why? That calm was not avoidance, it was an answer. The mind wants explanations, the soul wants alignment. Silence aligns you. In silence, prayer stops being about changing life and becomes about changing your relationship to life. You begin to notice something subtle. When you stop asking for strength, you feel steady. When you stop asking for love, you feel connected. When you stop asking for guidance, you feel clear. It's not that God suddenly shows up, it's that you finally made space. Listening prayer is not passive, it is alert, present, awake. You sit, not waiting for fireworks, but open to truth. You don't force meaning, you let meaning find you. And the more you practice this, the core. Your inner world becomes thoughts. Slow, urgency fades, faith deepens, not because you heard something mystical, but because you feel held. This is where prayer matures. At first, people pray to get something. Then they pray to fix something. Eventually, they pray to be with something greater than themselves. Silence is that final step. You stop asking God to enter your life. You step into His presence. And once you taste this, words begin to feel unnecessary, not because they are wrong, but because they are limited. Silence teaches you reverence, not fear, not obedience, but awe. You realize some things are too deep to be spoken. Some truths lose their power when turned into language. This is why the most sacred moments in life are quiet. Birth, death, love, grief, realization. Silence is the natural language of the sacred. And when prayer becomes listening, something changes in you. You stop needing signs. You stop demanding certainty. You stop bargaining with life. You begin to trust the unfolding. Faith becomes less about belief and more about surrender. Not surrender as weakness, but surrender as intelligence. The intelligence to know you don't see the whole picture. Listening prayer doesn't give you control, it gives you peace with not having control. And that peace is not resignation, it is freedom. You still act, you still strive, but you do so without anxiety, without desperation, without fear of missing something. Because when you listen deeply enough, you realize you are already being guided. Silence doesn't speak loudly, but it never lies. And once you learn to listen, you will never pray the same way again. Now we come to something most people misunderstand. Silence is often mistaken for withdrawal, for laziness, for passivity. But real silence is demanding. It asks more of you than noise ever could. Because silence requires discipline, not the loud kind of discipline that shows off. Not punishment, not force, but a quiet, steady devotion to showing up. Anyone can be busy, anyone can distract themselves, anyone can react. But very few people can sit with themselves consistently, day after day, without drama, without expectation. That is discipline. Silence does not mean you stop living. It means you start living intentionally. You begin to notice how scattered your energy has been, how often your attention leaks into things that don't matter, how much of your life is spent reacting instead of choosing. Silence gathers you. It brings your energy back home. Think of a temple not as a building but as a space, clean, open, uncluttered. You don't invite something sacred into chaos. You prepare the space. Discipline is preparation. Waking up when it's inconvenient, sitting when you'd rather escape, staying when the mind begs you to move, not to punish yourself, but to honor something deeper than comfort. Silence reveals how addicted we are to stimulation, how quickly we reach for phones, noise, people, validation. Discipline gently breaks this addiction. You start small, a few minutes of stillness, a few breaths of awareness, no performance, no forcing. At first, nothing dramatic happens, and that's where discipline is tested. The ego wants results, visions, experiences, proof. But silence does not perform on demand. So discipline teaches patience. It teaches you to value presence over payoff. You sit not to gain something, but because sitting itself becomes meaningful, and slowly, subtly, something shifts. You begin to feel grounded even before silence deepens. You begin to feel steady simply because you showed up, and that steadiness starts spilling into daily life. You listen better, you react less, you speak more deliberately. Discipline in silence trains you to be less impulsive and more intentional. This is where faith becomes practical. Faith is not belief in ideas. Faith is commitment without guarantees. You sit because it matters, not because you know what will happen, and that commitment reshapes you. Silence also teaches humility. Some days will feel clear, some days will feel dull, some days will feel restless. Discipline means you don't judge the day. You show up anyway. You stop chasing spiritual highs. You stop avoiding spiritual lows. You meet each moment as it is. This steadiness is powerful because life itself is inconsistent. If your peace depends on conditions, it will collapse. Discipline builds peace that does not depend on mood. Over time, silence becomes less about effort and more about rhythm, like brushing your teeth, like breathing, like returning home. And in that rhythm, something sacred grows quietly. You don't announce it, you don't advertise it, you live from it. People may notice you are calmer, more grounded, less reactive. They won't know why, And you won't need to explain. Discipline doesn't make you rigid. It makes you free. Free from compulsive thinking. Free from emotional extremes. Free from the constant hunger to be somewhere else. And here's the paradox. The more disciplined your silence becomes, the more effortless your faith feels. You stop trying to believe. Trust arises naturally. Because discipline has prepared the inner space, silence is no longer something you practice. It becomes something you carry, even in noise, even in movement, even in difficulty. That is when silence stops being an activity and becomes a way of being. And a life lived this way becomes a quiet prayer. Stay with it. Now the path becomes even more honest. Silence is dangerous to the ego, not because it attacks it, but because it ignores it. The ego survives on attention, on recognition, on being someone. Silence offers none of that. When you sit quietly, there is no audience, no comparison, no story to polish, no role to defend, just raw existence. And that feels like death to the ego. The ego wants to be important. Silence doesn't care. The ego wants to be right. Silence doesn't argue. The ego wants to be admired. Silence doesn't look back. That's why so many people avoid stillness, not because they can't sit, but because they can't disappear. In silence, you are no longer your title, no longer your achievements, no longer your failures, no longer your reputation. You are simply here. At first, this feels unsettling. The mind asks, if I am not my story, then who am I? And silence does not answer with words. It answers by removing the question. You begin to notice that beneath all identities, something remains, aware, present, unchanged. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall. This awareness stays. That awareness does not need validation. It does not need to prove anything. It does not need to become more. And the ego cannot survive there, not because it is destroyed violently, but because it is no longer fed. This is why silence feels like surrender, because control dissolves. You stop managing how you appear, even to yourself. You stop editing your inner life. You stop pretending, and something incredibly freeing happens. You realize how heavy the ego was, how much energy it took to maintain an image, to defend opinions, to compare lives, to measure worth. Silence removes that burden. You don't become weak, you become light, and in that lightness, compassion naturally arises. Because without ego, there is no separation, no me versus them, just shared humanity. This is where humility is born, not forced, not practiced. It appears naturally when there is no one left to inflate. You stop needing to be special, and in that you become authentic. The ego says, look at me. Silence says, look. And suddenly life feels richer, colors sharper, moments deeper, connections more real, because you are no longer filtered through self-importance. This is where God becomes close, not as an ideal, not as a belief, but as presence. Ego creates distance, silence dissolves it. When the ego fades, even briefly, you feel connected to people, to nature, to life itself. That connection is not emotional excitement. It is quiet intimacy. You don't feel above life. You feel part of it. And that belonging heals something very old inside you. The need to prove worth, the fear of being unseen, the hunger for approval. Silence tells you without words, you don't need to earn existence. You already belong. This is why silence feels sacred. It strips away what is false and reveals what is real. You are not your ego. You never were. You were the awareness watching it all along. And once you see that, Even for a moment, you can never fully forget it. The ego may return, it will speak again, it will try to reclaim control, but it will never feel as solid as before, because you have tasted something deeper. And that depth changes how you live. You listen more, you argue less, you serve without needing credit, you love without possession, not because you are trying to be spiritual, but because the ego is no longer in charge. Silence didn't take anything from you. It gave you yourself back. And when the false falls away, why the divine does not arrive loudly, it is simply there, as it always was. Now something soft enters the silence, something gentle, but powerful, gratitude, not gratitude, as a habit you perform, not something you list in a journal, but gratitude as a state of being. When silence deepens, the heart naturally opens. And when the heart opens, appreciation arises without effort. You stop demanding life to be different. You stop negotiating with reality. You begin to notice what is already here. The breath you didn't earn, the heartbeat you didn't schedule, the fact that existence continues to carry you moment by moment. Gratitude slows you down. It brings the mind from wanting into receiving. In silence, you begin to feel how much has been given without asking: air, light, time, awareness itself. And something inside you bows, not in weakness but in reverence. Gratitude is not positive thinking. It is clear seeing. You see that life owes you nothing and yet gives endlessly. This realization humbles the heart. You stop complaining so much, not because life becomes perfect, but because you stop taking it personally. Silence shows you that even difficulty has a place. Even loss carries lessons. Even pain deepens understanding. Gratitude does not deny suffering. It contextualizes it. You realize you are bigger than any single moment, held by something vast, intelligent, unseen. And when you feel held, anxiety loosens. This is why gratitude and silence belong together. Silence reverent, yields reality. Gratitude accepts it. Together, they create peace. You don't have to say thank you out loud. The body knows. The breath deepens, the shoulders relax, the heart softens. That softness is prayer, not words rising upward, but presence opening outward. In gratitude, you stop reaching for the future. You inhabit the now fully, and God lives in the now. The more grateful you become, the quieter your mind grows, because dissatisfaction is loud, contentment is silent. You stop asking what's next and start feeling this is enough. Enough does not mean finished. It means complete in this moment. And from that completeness, right action flows naturally. You give more, not because you should, but because fullness overflows. Gratitude turns silence into generosity. You begin to serve without effort, to help without calculation, to listen without impatience, not as a moral duty, but as a natural expression of inner abundance. This is how love becomes practical, not dramatic, not possessive, just present. Gratitude also dissolves entitlement. You stop expecting life to obey your plans. You cooperate instead, and cooperation brings grace. Even when things don't go your way, something inside remains steady, because you trust the larger movement of life. Silence teaches you trust. Gratitude anchors it. You no longer feel separate from existence. You feel supported by it. This is a deep spiritual maturity. Not excitement, not miracles, but grounded appreciation. And in that appreciation, God feels near. not as a figure watching from above, but as the intelligence moving through everything. You begin to live slower, but more deeply. You speak less, but more honestly. You want less, but feel richer. Gratitude doesn't make you passive, it makes you peaceful. And peace is not the absence of challenge, it is the presence of acceptance. This is how silence becomes warm, not empty, not cold, alive. And once gratitude becomes part of your silence, you will notice something beautiful. Life starts responding differently, not because you control it, but because you align with it. And alignment is the quiet language of God. Silence, if it is real, never ends with you. It flows outward. It becomes action without noise, service without identity. When the ego softens and gratitude deepens, something natural happens. You feel less separate, less enclosed in my life, my problems, my story. You begin to notice others not as interruptions but as reflections. Service does not arise from morality. It arises from clarity. When there is less me in the way, compassion does not need to be practiced. It simply happens. This is why the most meaningful service is quiet. No announcements, no need to be seen, no hunger for appreciation. Silence purifies intention. You stop helping to feel important. You stop giving to be remembered. You stop serving to build an identity of being good. You help because something within you recognizes something within another. That recognition is sacred. In silence, you see how interconnected life truly is, how your breath is not separate from the air, how your well-being is not separate from others' suffering, and service becomes as natural as breathing. You don't ask, "What will I get from this?" You ask, "What is needed now?" And sometimes what is needed is action. Sometimes it is listening. Sometimes it is stepping aside. Silence teaches discernment. Not every problem needs fixing. Not every pain needs advice. Presence itself is often the greatest gift. Most people serve loudly. They talk about it. They define themselves by it. But loud service still belongs to the ego. Quiet service belongs to love. You may never be thanked. You may never be recognized. And something in you will feel relieved by that. Because the moment service becomes invisible, it becomes pure. This is how silence enters the world. Not through preaching, not through control, but through small, precise acts done with awareness. A kind word spoken without agenda. An honest effort made without complaint. A boundary held without anger. A presence offered without trying to fix. This is spirituality grounded in reality. Silence does not make you float above the world. It makes you useful within it. And usefulness gives life meaning, not meaning as a concept, but meaning as fulfillment. You feel aligned in the right place, doing the right thing, not because it's written somewhere, but because it feels right in your bones. Service born from silence never exhausts you. It energizes you because it does not come from obligation. It comes from overflow. You are no longer trying to save the world. You are simply responding to what is in front of you. And that humility keeps you grounded. You stop seeing yourself as a hero. You become a participant. This removes pressure. You do your part and let go of the rest. Silence also teaches restraint. You don't interfere unnecessarily. You don't impose your help. You respect timing. True service respects freedom. And because there is no ego attached, there is no resentment when things don't change. You give without attachment to outcome. That is powerful. It means your peace is not dependent on success. Your worth is not tied to results. You act from truth. and let life respond in its own way. This is how silence and action merge. Stillness inside, movement outside, calm at the center, clarity at the edges. And people feel this. They may not know why, but they trust you because your presence is not demanding. You are not trying to convince. You are simply there. This is how God works through human hands, not loudly, not dramatically, but effectively. When silence becomes service, spirituality leaves the cushion and enters life. And life becomes practice. One of the greatest misunderstandings about silence is the belief that it should always feel peaceful. People sit down expecting calm, clarity, or light, and they meet restlessness instead. They think something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. Silence is not entertainment. It does not exist to reward you. It exists to transform you, and transformation is slow. Perseverance is the invisible backbone of the silent path, not intensity, not inspiration, but staying when the mind is noisy, staying when the heart feels dull, staying when faith feels dry. Most people quit right before silence begins to deepen, because the ego gets bored before it gets exposed. In the beginning, silence feels unremarkable, no visions, no revelations, just thoughts repeating themselves. The same worries, the same restlessness, and the mind says this isn't working. But silence was never meant to work for the mind. It was meant to outlast it. Perseverance teaches you something profound. You don't need a good experience to stay committed. You sit not because it feels good, but because it feels true. This is where faith matures. At first, people rely on motivation. They sit when inspired. They pray when emotional. They feel connected when life is smooth. But inspiration is unreliable. Emotion comes and goes. Perseverance stays. Silence tests you by removing rewards. No excitement, no reassurance, no confirmation, just repetition. And repetition humbles the ego. You learn to show up without expectation, to be present without demand, to trust without proof. This kind of perseverance changes your relationship with time. You stop rushing toward outcomes. You stop measuring progress daily. You allow growth to be invisible. Just like roots grow in darkness, silence works beneath the surface. You may not notice change for weeks, months, sometimes years, but then one day something is different. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of defend. You pause instead of panic. And you realize silence has been working quietly all along. Perseverance also teaches compassion toward yourself. You stop judging bad days. You stop glorifying good ones. You treat each sitting, each moment with equal respect. This steadiness builds an inner trust. You begin to trust yourself, not your moods but your commitment. And that trust becomes strength. Life will test you. Loss will come. Disappointment will arrive. Confusion will return. But perseverance in silence gives you an anchor. You don't collapse inward. You don't escape outward. You stay. Silence trains you to remain present with uncertainty. And uncertainty is where most people lose themselves. Perseverance keeps you grounded when answers don't arrive quickly. You learn that clarity is not always immediate. Sometimes the lesson is endurance itself. This is not passive waiting. It is active patience, a deep agreement with life's timing. Silence teaches you that rushing truth only delays it, and perseverance removes the urgency that blocks understanding. Eventually, silence stops being something you do occasionally. It becomes something you rely on, like a home you return to when the world overwhelms you. And the more you return, the more familiar it becomes. Faith stops being a feeling you chase and becomes a posture you stand in. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady. Perseverance does not make you rigid, it makes you resilient. You bend without breaking, you pause without quitting, you rest without giving up. And that resilience spreads into everything you do. Work becomes calmer, relationships become clearer, decisions become simpler, because you are no longer desperate for certainty. You trust the process. Silence taught you how. This is the quiet victory no one sees, but everyone feels, and once perseverance has done its work, something final unfolds. Then we arrive. Without arriving, at the end of the silent path, there is no reward waiting, no title, no badge, no moment where the universe applauds and says, "You made it." There's only this realization: you become what you sit with. All this time, silence was not preparing you for something else, it was shaping you. When you sit with noise long enough, you become restless. When you sit with fear, you become anxious. When you sit with ambition alone, you become hollow. But when you sit with silence, you become spacious. And in that space, God fits naturally, without force, without effort. This is the final understanding. God does not enter you like a visitor. God is revealed when there is room. Silence clears the clutter. It removes excess. It simplifies, and simplicity is sacred. You notice that life feels lighter now, not easier, but clearer. You still face challenges, but they don't define you. You still feel pain, but it doesn't consume you. You still think, but thoughts no longer own you, because something deeper has taken root. Awareness. You begin to live from awareness instead of reaction, from presence instead of habit, from truth instead of fear. And that changes everything. You don't need to announce your faith. It is visible in how you move, how you listen, how you pause before speaking. Your calm becomes your testimony. People may ask you what changed. You may not know how to explain it, because silence doesn't give explanations. It gives embodiment. You no longer seek God as an idea. You feel God as a quiet intelligence moving through life, in conversations, in decisions, in moments of stillness between actions. God becomes less personal and more intimate, not a figure watching from afar, but a presence unfolding within everything. This is why silence is the path and the destination. There is no separation anymore between practice and life, between prayer and action, between sacred and ordinary. Everything becomes infused with meaning. You wash dishes with awareness. You walk with presence. You speak with intention, not because you are trying to be spiritual, but because spirituality has become natural. This is the quiet miracle. You stop seeking fulfillment elsewhere. You stop postponing peace. You stop waiting for life to begin. Life is happening now, and you are here for it. Silence has taught you the greatest lesson of all. Nothing essential is missing. Not in you, not in this moment. You don't need to escape yourself to find God. You don't need to improve yourself to deserve Him. You only needed to be still long enough to recognize what was always there. This is the silent path, not dramatic, not loud, not impressive, but real. And once you walk it, you don't walk away changed. You walk away simpler, clearer, more human, more present. And in that presence, God is no longer a question. He is the quiet certainty beneath every breath. And that is enough. Yes, then let me leave you with this. Not as teaching, not as philosophy, but as a truth to live by. You don't reach God by climbing higher. You reach Him by becoming quieter. The world will keep telling you to hurry, to prove, to accumulate, to become someone important. But God has never lived in noise. He has never lived in pressure. He has never lived in the future. He lives in the pause between breaths, in the space between thoughts, in the stillness you keep postponing. You don't need a better past. You don't need a guaranteed future. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to be present, because when you're present, you are real. And when you are real, you are humble. And when you are humble, you are open. And when you are open, God has room. Silence will not make you famous. It will not make you impressive, but it will make you free from the hunger to be seen, free from the fear of being enough, free from the noise that keeps you running in circles. Sit still, not to escape life, but to finally meet it. Listen, not for answers, but for alignment. And trust this: if you make space for silence, silence will make space for God. And once you've touched that stillness, no storm can take it from you. Because faith is not something you shout, it's something you stand on, quietly, firmly, forever. So when the world gets loud, be still. When fear tells you to rush, slow down. When doubt asks you for proof, choose faith. Because God does not compete for your attention, He waits for your surrender. Put God first, not in your words, but in your stillness. Not I and what you ask for, but in what you trust. Show up. Sit quietly. Do the work. Serve without being seen, and remember this truth: when you place God at the center, you don't lose direction, you gain foundation. Build your life on that foundation, and no storm will move you. When the world gets loud, it doesn't ask for your permission. It pulls, it demands, it rushes you into becoming someone before you understand who you are. You wake up already behind, already chasing, already proving. And if you're not careful, you'll build an entire life responding to noise and never hear your own soul. That's why stillness is not weakness, it's resistance. When fear tells you to hurry, it's rarely because something sacred is waiting. It's usually because something hollow is chasing you. Slow down. Not to fall behind, but to fall in alignment. Faith has never been about speed. Truth has never been in a rush. God has never panicked. The world says move faster or you'll miss your chance. God says be still, I am already here. And here's the hard truth most people never learn. You can do everything right in the eyes of the world and still feel empty at night. You can achieve success and lose your soul in the process. You can climb every ladder and discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. That's why faith isn't something you add after you succeed. Faith is what tells you which success is worth pursuing. Put God first, not because life is easy, but because life is uncertain. Put God first, not because you have answers, but because you trust the one who does. Putting God first does not mean perfection. It means priority. It means when your plans fall apart, your peace doesn't. It means when applause fades, your purpose remains. It means when doors close, you don't collapse. You listen, because faith is not confidence in outcomes. Faith is confidence in direction. Most people wait until they are desperate to turn inward, until pain forces humility, until loss strips illusions. But wisdom chooses God before the breakdown, before the collapse, before the warning signs become consequences. Stillness is how you choose early. In stillness you learn the difference between ambition and calling, between hunger and purpose, between ego-driven urgency and God-led timing. And timing matters. What arrives too early becomes a burden. What arrives too late becomes regret. But what arrives in God's time becomes a blessing. The problem is, you can't hear timing in noise. Noise tells you to compare. Noise tells you to compete. Noise tells you to perform. Silence tells you the truth. Silence tells you when to move, and when to wait, when to speak, and when to let go. when to push and when to trust. That's why discipline matters. Not discipline as punishment, discipline as devotion. Show up even when no one sees, sit even when nothing happens, serve even when no credit comes. Because character is built in unseen moments. God does His deepest work when the room is quiet. T. And let me tell you something real. If you only believe when you feel inspired, your faith will collapse the moment life gets heavy. But if you anchor your life in stillness, storms lose their authority. You will still feel fear, but it won't lead you. You will still feel pain, but it won't define you. You will still face uncertainty, but it won't own you, because peace is not the absence of struggle. Peace is the presence of God in the struggle, and that changes how you move. You stop reacting to everything. You stop explaining yourself to everyone. You stop chasing validation from people who don't know your calling. You move slower, but with precision. You speak less, but with truth. You want less, but you lack nothing. This is what it means to put God first, not religious performance, not public declarations, but private alignment. God first in your mornings, God first in your decisions, God first when no one is watching. Because what you do in silence determines who you become in public. A life built on noise will collapse under pressure. A life built on God will bend but not break. That's the foundation, not wealth, not status, not influence. Foundation is what holds when everything else is shaken, and everything will be shaken. Careers change, relationships shift, health fades, plans fail, but the person rooted in God remains steady, not untouched, but unlost. You don't need to be fearless. You need to be faithful. Faith is not loud. It does not announce its elf. It stands quietly while the world storms. Faith says, even if I don't understand, I trust. Faith says, even if it hurts, I remain. Faith says, even if I fall forward. And when you live this way, something powerful happens. You stop living to impress. You start living to serve. You stop asking, what do I get? You start asking, what is required of me? And service gives life meaning that success never can. Success feeds ego. Service feeds purpose. And purpose outlives applause. One day, the noise will quiet on its own. The screens will dim. The crowds will fade. And you will be left with one question. Did I live aligned or distracted? Did I listen or rush? Did I build on faith or on fear? So act now, not dramatically but deliberately. Create space for silence. Protect it. Return to it. Let God shape your direction before the world assigns you one. And remember this timeless truth. Write it into your life. When you place God at the center, you don't lose ambition. You gain clarity. You don't lose control. You gain stability. You don't lose yourself. You finally find yourself. Build your life on that foundation, because storms will come. But a life rooted in God will still be standing. When the noise is gone, when the world gets loud, it doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't knock. It barges in. It fills your mornings before you've even opened your eyes. Notifications, expectations, deadlines, comparisons. You wake up already carrying weight that isn't you. Hours. And if you don't pause, if you don't choose stillness deliberately, you will spend your entire life reacting instead of living. That's why stillness is not weakness. It is strength under control. It is courage without noise. It is faith without performance. The world confuses motion with progress, but movement without alignment is just exhaustion. Slow down, not because you're falling behind, but because you're losing yourself. Faith has never lived in a hurry. Truth has never needed urgency. God has never raced against time. The world says, move faster or you'll miss your chance. God says, be still, nothing meant for you will pass you. And this is where the real divide happens, not between belief and disbelief, but between priority and distraction. You can say you believe in God and still build your life around fear. You can speak faith and still let noise make your decisions. Putting God first is not about what you say, it's about what you trust when pressure rises. Because pressure reveals priority. When life squeezes you, what comes out? Panic or prayer, control or surrender, fear or faith? Most people turn to God only when everything else fails. When money runs out, when relationships collapse, when certainty disappears. But wisdom chooses God before desperation, before the breakdown, before the regret, before the warning signs become consequences. Putting God first is not insurance for a painless life. It is an anchor for a meaningful one. You see, life is uncertain. By design, if it were predictable, faith would be unnecessary. If outcomes were guaranteed, trust would be irrelevant. Faith is not knowing how things will turn out. Faith is knowing who you belong to when they don't. And belonging changes everything. When God is first, your peace is no longer hostage to results. You stop tying your worth to wins. You stop letting losses define you. You begin to live from a deeper center. The world tells you to build fast. God tells you to build deep. The world rewards visibility. God honors integrity. The world celebrates arrival. God watches foundation, and foundation matters more than you think. Because everything built on appearance eventually collapses under pressure. Careers change, markets crash, bodies age, applause fades. But a life built on faith has something the world cannot touch: stability without certainty. You will still feel fear, but it won't rule you. You will still feel pain, but it won't own you. You will still face confusion, but it won't paralyze you, because your footing is not emotional, it is spiritual. This is what it means to put God first. Not religion, not performance, not perfection. Priority. God first in the morning, before the world defines you. God first in decisions, before fear chooses for you. God first in silence, before noise steals clarity. Silence is where alignment happens. In silence you hear the difference between impulse and instruction, between ego and intuition, between what you want and what you are. Called to do, noise rushes you into mistakes. Silence saves you from them. And here's the truth. Most people never hear. If you don't choose silence intentionally, life will eventually force stillness on you through pain, burnout, breakdown, loss. Stillness always comes. The only question is whether you meet it by choice or by consequence. Stillness is not inactivity, it is preparation. In stillness, God rearranges priorities. He removes what looks urgent but isn't essential. He clarifies what matters long after the noise is gone. This is where discipline comes in, not discipline as punishment, discipline as devotion, showing up when it's inconvenient, being faithful when nothing feels rewarding, choosing consistency over excitement, because faith that only works when you feel inspired will collapse when life gets heavy. Emotion is unstable. Discipline is faithful. You don't build strength by intensity alone. You build it by repetition. You pray even when you feel dry. You sit even when your mind resists. You trust even when answers delay. That kind of faith doesn't announce itself. It stands quietly. And quiet faith outlasts loud confidence every time. The world teaches you to chase certainty. God teaches you to walk with trust. Certainty demands proof. Trust requires surrender. And surrender is not giving up. It is giving control back to where it belongs. When God is first, you don't stop planning. You stop panicking. You don't lose ambition. You lose desperation. You still work hard, but you no longer work afraid. Fear-driven ambition burns people out. Faith-driven purpose sustains them. You begin to act from clarity instead of urgency, from conviction instead of comparison, and comparison is one of the quietest thieves of joy. The moment you compare your timeline to someone else's, you lose touch with your own calling. God does not rush His work. He is precise. What comes too early becomes a burden. What comes too late becomes regret. What comes in God's time becomes blessing. But timing cannot be heard in noise. Noise tells you you're late. Noise tells you you're behind. Noise tells you to hurry. Silence tells you the truth. Silence tells you when to move and when to wait, when to speak and when to stay quiet, when to let go and when to hold steady. And obedience to timing is one of the highest forms of faith, not obedience driven by fear, but obedience rooted in trust. Trust that even delays are purposeful. Trust that detours are not denials. Trust that closed doors are protection. When God is first, rejection stops feeling personal. Failure stops feeling final. Waiting stops feeling wasted. You begin to understand that some seasons are not about progress, they are about preparation. Roots grow in darkness, foundations are laid underground, and the most important work often happens unseen. That's why service matters. Service without recognition, service without applause, service without identity attached. Because service removes ego from the equation. You stop asking, how does this make me look? And start asking, what does love require here? And love, when it is real, is rarely loud. Quiet service changes the world more than loud opinions ever will. You don't need to be known. You need to be faithful. You don't need to control outcomes. You need to control alignment. A life aligned with God may not always look impressive, but it will always be grounded. And grounding is what keeps you standing when storms hit. Storms are not optional, they are promised. Loss will come, disappointment will arrive, certainty will leave. But when God is first, you are not shaken to your core. You bend, you grieve, you feel, but you do not lose yourself. Because faith is not pretending everything is okay. Faith is standing firm even when it isn't. Faith says, I don't understand, but I trust. Faith says, I don't see the way, but I will walk. Faith says, even if I fall forward. And falling forward means learning, adjusting, growing, not hardening, not numbing, not giving up. The world celebrates winning. God honors perseverance. And perseverance builds something, winning. Never can character holds you when success leaves you exposed. One day the noise will quiet on its own. Screens will dim, crowds will fade. Titles will stop meaning what they once did. And you will be left with a simple truth. What you built your life on is what will remain. So choose now, deliberately. Choose stillness over chaos, faith over fear, alignment over approval. Put God first, not because you are weak, but because you want to be unshakable. Not because life is easy, but because life is unpredictable. Not because you have all the answers, but because you trust the one who does. And remember this timeless truth, carry it with you. When you place God at the center, you don't lose direction. You gain foundation. You don't lose ambition. You gain clarity. You don't lose control. You gain peace. Build your life on that foundation, because storms will come, noise will return, pressure will rise, but a life rooted in God will still be standing long after the world stops shouting